Welcome, folks. This is David Reichel with the Sierra Avalanche Center. I'm here with Nick Russell, I'm a professional snowboarder with Patagonia and Red Bull. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we're here tonight to talk about an avalanche that Nick was involved in 2 years ago, and produced a great video was produced about that titled Buried Alive, Real Life Avalanche Burial and Rescue. And so it's a little bit of a spoiler alert. If you haven't watched that video, or if you're not familiar with this accident, I would encourage you to press pause on this and go find that video. It's on Jones Snowboard's YouTube page. It's also linked to from the Sierra Avalanche Center, our California Avalanche Workshop page, and multiple other places. But there's a lot of resources about this slide, and that's kind of why I reached out to Nick to talk about it, because it's such a valuable case study. And I'm going to introduce Nick for a second before we kind of get into it. But as a way of doing that, I just want to say that, I have to find speakers for the California Avalanche Workshop, and I emailed Nick, said, hey, would you be at all interested in this? And his response was, I'd love to be a part of it. And as someone who has to kind of send out all these emails and line up speakers, having someone respond in such an enthusiastic way was incredibly encouraging. So thank you for responding that way, Nick, and thanks for being here.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for all that you do and putting these events together. I think in a time of COVID, we kind of got to adapt, and it's allowed us to utilize technology and do fun little events like this, especially going into the season. Just digesting as much knowledge about the mountains and information about avalanches, and just kind of switch gears from summer to fall to winter. Is really important, because your brain starts thinking in a different way, on the day-to-day basis. You start checking the weather a little bit more closely. And then now that you guys are posting updates to the Avi Center and, posting to Instagram, it's, just total shift. And it's great to just kind of get the ball rolling and heading into the season.
I totally agree. Before we go into this accident, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about yourself for folks who may not. I am a snowboarder, but sadly there are skiers and snowmobilers out there who are not cool snowboarders and may not be as familiar with your career. But just quickly, what's maybe a favorite international trip that you've done?
Kind of went on a travel kick there for a couple of years, and been to the Middle East, to Turkey, to explore primitive snowboard shapes, a lot in South America, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, up in Alaska, a handful of trips up to Denali National Park, St. Elias National Park. And, anytime to Alaska is, you just feel like you're on the moon, and really humbles you, puts you in your place. And then South America, it's just so wild and raw and untapped that you really need to be self-sufficient with your skills and take conservative decision making down there, because there's minimal rescue resources down there. So you got to know that for the most part, if something goes wrong, you're on your own. And so keeping that mindset going into a big trip like that is crucial.
Agreed. I very much miss traveling in South America and
me too.
Hang out in Argentina and places like that. Hopefully we can do that again sometime soon.
Someday.
And then more close to home, you've been based here in the Sierra for a while. What's a highlight Sierra trip for you?
Pretty much as soon as I moved out here, which was about 7-8 years ago or so, in the springtime, started doing that migration down to the Eastern Sierra and sleeping at trailheads and trying to climb and ride big peaks, is always a highlight. As much as I love powder and riding these huge storms that we have at home and in the lake, around the lake, the Eastern Sierra always holds, just adventure down there. You can load up a heavy backpack and go out for several days at a time and go get lost and explore a huge range. So that's definitely, a highlight and a perk of living out here. It's going down to those bigger mountains.
Totally agree. 395 is for a mountain person, is such an incredible drive.
Just like a rite of passage. I love that drive, man.
Agreed. More formally or informally, what's been some of your avalanche education, training, experiences that were important for you?
Yeah, I did my first avalanche course maybe around 10 years ago, formal avalanche course, and that was after an avalanche accident. A friend of mine got caught in a slide up in Washington, and thankfully he was okay in the grand scheme of things. But I was sort of just on the sideline on the rescue, and a lot of the older guys that I was with, thankfully, were able to take the charge on that. But going through a experience like that, it just really gets you into gear and makes you want to learn as much as you can about mountain safety, so you can react properly when accidents do happen. And unfortunately they do happen, and so having those skills in your pocketbook are invaluable. But yeah, so that first avalanche course, and then through over the last 10 years I've done some sort of avalanche refresher, whether it be a formal course. I have my AVI 2 cert, and then wilderness first responder cert that I refresh every 2 years, the first responder cert. And so yeah, whether it's a formal recert or just kind of getting together with my friends and spending a few days strictly going over avalanche protocols. Done that every year for the past 11 years or so, and gearing back into that time of year. And so already starting to put together a refresher course for myself, people, my riding partners, and camera crews and whatnot. And yeah, I think every avalanche course should pair with a first aid course. I think nowadays they're starting to bring more emphasis on patient care in the event of an accident. But yeah, just pairing the two together and seeking out instructors that specialize in those different areas has been really helpful for me.
I've taught a ton of avalanche courses in my day, and plugging a wilderness first aid or wilderness first responder is like part of my course close. Like, we haven't covered any of this information in this course. It's super important. They're fun courses to help you all year round, not just in the winter. Go take one. And having great avalanche knowledge is useful, but eventually something's going to go wrong, and it might not even be avalanche related, right? Like, you're going to fall just randomly on the exit or something and pop something out of socket, and having some knowledge would be super helpful.
Totally. Yeah. And then just, with that, building your first aid kit and, all the gear that goes in your day-to-day pack, it has been really important for me, because you realize you get into a wilderness first responder course, and, you need to get someone warm and off the snow, and you don't have a tarp, you don't have a pad. And it's so those little things, you continue to take those courses year after year, and sort of drills that home. And just helps you dial your whole scene in the mountains and your personal protocol for yourself and your ski partners.
And early season is like the perfect time to be doing something like this, to be doing like those courses. And I'm going to use that as a segue to our sort of official topic. But the avalanche that we're here to talk about actually happened on December 9th, which is very early season for legit avalanche, having relatively good snow conditions. So maybe I'll try to explain a little bit the weather and everything where we're at, and then jump in if I get anything wrong there. But there was about 170 centimeters of snow, which is a meter and 3/4 of snow, a lot of snow for early season. Avalanche took place on Basin Peaks, or the shoulder of Basin Peak, north of Donner Summit in the Tahoe Truckee area. It was about 8,500 feet northwest slope.
Northeast.
Northeast, thank you. The other way, good call. We had a good amount of snow. There'd been a break, and then another good storm shortly before this accident occurred. And then, so again, folks should watch this video that Buried Alive, which sets us all up much better with video and stuff than what I'm doing right now. But Nick, you and a crew were hanging out at this sweet hut up there, and you woke up to a sweet powder morning. And can you kind of quickly walk us through what transpired?
Yeah, well, to set the scene, coincidentally, it was the first day of an avalanche refresher of a 3-day course that I was doing with a handful of riders from the Jones snowboard team. And so we were planning on staying up at the hut and just doing a safety refresher. We had a friend instructing, and we were going to go through scenarios and really just brush up our skills. But the snowfall in the days prior, the conditions were lining up to be really good. So a handful of us went up early to the hut the night before so we could go riding early in the morning before we started doing the avalanche course. And so it was a kickstart into the refresher, kind of just real world scenario right off the bat. And yeah, the morning started off as it has a million times. We woke up in the dark, had the headlamps, got to the ridge, saw a beautiful sunrise. And being the when myself and my riding partners, when we're out in the mountains, oftentimes we're filming and we're shooting photos. Just kind of comes with the nature of it. And so we were already in that mindset. Everybody had radios and everyone was kind of on the ridge scoping out their lines. And myself and 3 others went south down the ridge to ride lines first. And that kind of funnels out into its own little apron. And where the avalanche occurred was a little bit further north and had its own little dish up there. So 4 of us dropped in on lines, kind of spaced out one at a time, and we were filming and moved over to the base of where the slide occurred. And that's where we were able to get the footage of the avalanche. I filmed it. I had my phone out, and thankfully I was in the perfect location to see everything that happened. And when the avalanche broke, and you can see in the video, kind of yell avalanche, and I'm filming, and then all of a sudden it gets shaky, and I put the phone away to try to get eyes on Greg, who was the rider that got taken down in the avalanche. And as soon as the snow settled, as soon as it stopped moving, it was clear that he was buried. When things like that happen, you're either waiting for your partner to pull out to the side, yell that they're okay, or maybe they went for a little ride and you're waiting for them to yell that they're okay. And I mentioned this in the video, that when you don't hear that yell, that you got to kind of kick into gear. And so yeah, the events that followed was our rescue. And I was far enough away, where kind of just start bolting up there. And it was pretty deep powder, so it was tiring trail breaking, running up there. Anyone that's ever done that, it wears you out really quickly. And you kind of have to tap into that next level, that next energy reserve, and move on from there.
And how far, I mean, one of the things that went very well for you was how quickly I think you were able to find your friend. And how far roughly would you say that was from where you were observing to where you found him?
I would say, maybe like 200 feet vert. Yeah, maybe probably like a football field away, I would say. Which doesn't seem like a lot, but once you get into fresh snow and then a bit of debris, that becomes pretty far. And so we're super grateful and thankful that we were located where we were, because otherwise that rescue time could have easily doubled. And then you never know what could have happened after that.
All right, and so then it was actually you who had the strongest signal. It was, I think, the one whose transceiver sort of took you into your friend. Can you walk us through that stage of the recovery?
Yeah. So, as soon as the avalanche settled, started bolting up there. And as soon as I started approaching the toe of the debris, I had then stopped kind of when I was, getting fairly close to it. And then that was when I stopped to switch my beacon over and yelled to the other three riders to turn their beacons over. We had one rider at the top, and as soon as I turned my beacon over, let everything settle for a bit, probably only took a couple of seconds until everyone's signals were suppressed and on search. And I was able to pick up a signal pretty early on from like a 30-meter blip that popped up. But you are looking at your surroundings, so it was clear I was below the toe of the debris, so I knew he was above me. So I was able to start moving higher up the mountain, knowing that I was going in the right direction, thankfully, because sometimes those debris piles can just explode, and then at that point you're maybe a little bit more reliant on your beacon. But generally speaking, you have somewhat of an idea of where the buried rider skier is, especially if you had seen the accident. So yeah, I got a signal pretty early on at about 30, and it kind of kept going down in the right direction. And being in front and having that strongest signal, just by default, I became the point man for the beacon, and it was able to bring me, within 5 meters or so. And it was at that point that I turned around to a friend of mine, Harry, who already had his probe assembled behind me. And how I remember it, I looked back and he threw me a probe as if it was a javelin, and I caught it. And at that point, I had started honing in on a signal and getting a little closer. And within the first probe strike, I was able to get him. And at that point, I backed up, and the other three remaining riders, and then the rider at the top, Andrew, were able to move in with shovels. And I left the probe in and took a few steps back to assemble my shovel. And we found that with kind of the first scoop from the shovel, it was the back of his high back, and he was face down, head down the hill. And so we had to work down from the probe strike, and kind of, so about 1.5 meters down from where the probe strike was. And just the contours of the mountain and where his body was located, it worked out perfectly where we could dig into the slope up to him, versus going straight down and kind of just having this hole that, extraction becomes an issue, and you have to end up doing more work on the back end because your initial shoveling was a little bit off. So kind of, everything just fell into place perfectly for this rescue. And by the time I had jumped in with my shovel, we now had 5 of us shoveling. We were able to get down to his head pretty quickly and get an airway pretty quickly. And thankfully, the snow was light, so the debris was easy shoveling. Had it been a heavier duty storm slab, once again, that time could have doubled.
And part of that is presumably because it wasn't that long of an avalanche. Like from top, I mean, it's in the video, but what was your recollection of how from, where the top of the crown was to where you found your friend, how many feet that was?
Not much, probably 300 vertical feet or so. The slope itself was 600. So yeah, about 300 vertical feet. And in Tahoe, is that's the terrain that we like to play in, those shorter slopes with those steeper pitches, that do have those convex rollovers, that complex terrain. So yeah, it kind of went to show, you don't need this huge slope to
Totally.
bury somebody. It's those little playful, roly techie lines.
And so we should probably finish that part of the story before we talk about other things, but you were relatively quickly able to get your friend out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And,
I think all
and it,
said and done, it was under 4 minutes. Someone had it on there, was able to look at the clock, but when those things are happening, it felt like forever, of course, feels like you're
and,
walking in quicksand.
and I believe
And
he'd lost conscious, but came to quickly and was okay.
yep. Yeah, when we pretty much as soon as we cleared the airway, he was still face down, but he was conscious and yelling, and of course kind of freaking out, understandably. But we still had some more digging to do to be able to fully free him from the debris. And um, then that kind of goes in to what you learn in a first responder course of trying to stabilize the patient, because you don't know if they could have tweaked their neck and done something weird with their back. And so at this point he was still on his belly face down, and we were able to get him unstrapped from his snowboard, and I was able to do a loose, pretty loose C-spine, mobilizing the neck when we flipped him over. But pretty quickly, he was totally coherent, totally with it. And it was just a miracle that he was okay and walking out of that.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump to some other sort of questions to think about with this accident. Human factors are always maybe the biggest contributing factor. And I wanted, you already mentioned some of them. I mean, this was a group of professionals, high level, high skill, high experience people, some like yourselves who've traveled a lot, skied a lot of stuff. And the slope that the avalanche occurred is typical for Tahoe, but 600-ish feet top to bottom, with avalanche terrain on it, like a steep section, but not huge by like global scales, by something you've done in Alaska or South America or something. It's more impressive from a distance. But and I'm just curious, generally, if you could address the human factors of a group such as that morning.
Yeah, familiarity comes into it a lot. This is an area that we go riding a lot, especially early season. It's higher elevation and it films well. It's fun to snowboard on. The tours are great out of there. Very conducive to riding and skiing, so probably having spent dozens of days on that area, I don't want to say we totally let our guard down, but it kind of takes something like that to remind you that even on these smaller slopes, you're not free from risk.
Yeah, I think familiarity is a classic one for, a professional snowboarder or an avalanche professional. Like, you become very comfortable in terrain that's still dangerous, and that comfort that I feel is dumb, and I need to like not let myself, feel that, or otherwise it can start to encourage me to make poor decisions or to not be as alert as I should be, at least.
Totally.
Um, so group size, I think there was 8 people total in your crew, I think.
Something like that, 8 or 9.
Okay.
And
like positives and negatives, what do you think about that for this accident?
generally speaking, that was a big group to be out in the mountains with. More often than not, it's 2 to 4 people, that we're going out with. But the fact that we did have that many people, we had 5 of us directly involved in the rescue, certainly, gave us the outcome that occurred. Having 4 people shoveling, having people ready behind you with probes and shovels, contributed to the success of the rescue 100%. And had this been a situation where we were party boarding with the crew of us, like, it would have been a little different. Like, yeah, the group size was way too big, But I think the fact that we were in that somewhat of a filming mindset, with eyes on and one at a time, ultimately, I think it was to our benefit.
Oh, tremendously. I mean, the difference between having one buried person versus two or more is huge in terms of time that's going to be necessary to extricate them, I think. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's talk about slope configuration for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there was a portion of that slope that was avalanche terrain steeper than 30 degrees, but at the top, I believe that slope was not particularly steep, right? And then sort of got steeper mid slope. Is that
Correct.
correct? And like, do you want to, I mean, that to me is very interesting and like a challenge for me as a backcountry snowboarder.
Yeah, same here. The top of the slope was pretty mellow, probably 20 degrees or so, and then had a convex roll about a third of the way down it. And as snowboarders, that's kind of the terrain that we're looking for, right? We're looking for these waves and banks to slash, and um, this complex broken terrain, right? Where it's, kind of feels like spine-esque features, rollovers, um, and that made it very difficult to, to be able to assess the slope from above, uh, from an avalanche perspective. There were no cornices to break, or if there were, they were going onto a 20-degree slope and they weren't going to show any signs of instability. Um, you know, People have asked, did we dig a snow pit before dropping in? Digging a snow pit on that first pitch wouldn't have showed us any results. I believe. I don't believe that buried surface hoard that was the culprit was present on that slope. It was at the convex roll a couple hundred feet
It might
down.
not have been at the top because of previous wind or whatever, and so it might not have been present there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a nice segue to like, with the benefit of hindsight. So I think the day after the actual accident occurred, a couple of forecasters from the Sierra Avalanche Center went out there and, dug a pit, kind of, I think on a lower angle section adjacent to where the slide occurred. And, they looked for, what was the culprit, and to the best of their ability, it looks as though it was a thin layer of buried surface ore, which is interesting. Do you like, this is hard to recall or whatever, but like for the forecast on the day of the accident, like the first avalanche problem, it was a moderate day in general. And then the first avalanche problem was wind slab. And then the second avalanche problem was storm slab, with sort of a high amount of uncertainty around this potential buried surface ore layer. Do you recall generally like where those sorts of things came up in you guys' discussion of what to ski or to avoid that day?
In Tahoe, I feel like we live in that moderate world. I would say that over 75% of our days fall under that moderate category. And, that kind of comes back to familiarity, where, our storm cycles are fairly predictable, right? Compared to other ranges that have more of a continental intermountain snowpack. And that definitely was a contributing factor to it, I would say. Um, just seeing sort of right off the bat, maybe, at first glance, oh, wind slab, that's easy to identify, but it was dry snow up top, and it was smooth. It was not textured. So, wind slab wasn't a concern. And, that buried surface hoar, that storm slab, kind of by our test runs that we did. So, the four of us that dropped in a little bit further south down the ridge didn't produce any avalanches. The spidey senses were not tingling at that point.
That surface ore that was, ultimately the culprit for this slide was a known thing, but it wasn't everywhere. It wasn't super widespread. When people who have, studied this stuff go and look at the pit for this accident, the test results are kind of mixed, right? It's not like all the test results are going on that buried surface hoar layer. There's an extended column test with propagation, indicating that there's a buried weak layer, that surface hoar at that layer. And then there were 2, I believe, with no propagation. And, it was mixed. So like that weak layer was present, and obviously like that's what contributed to that slide, but it was definitely not a strong enough, widespread enough, weak enough layer that there was a lot of results, which is, like you said, it can make it trickier when it's less pronounced, less bad, right? If the first person in his first turn had triggered an avalanche, that's really good feedback when you can kind of, whatever it was, 7 people can go down slopes and not trigger anything. It's, as human beings, very hard to, to not take that as reassurance, even though obviously a lingering danger was still present.
Yeah, and that's where that, persistent weak layers just in general. That's why I live in the Sierra, because we don't deal with that on a day-to-day basis, compared to the Tetons or in the Wasatch or something. And that's where it becomes unpredictable, and in the forecast, uncertainty exists about this buried surface hoar, and that's what it is. It's uncertain, and it's not widespread and very isolated. And in that area, it kind of creates its own weather, right? Where sometimes fog layers come in and sit on that ridge, and I think that fog layer created that surface hoar, which is why it wasn't found necessarily in other parts of the range.
And just to jump in there, sorry, like one of the resources that we sort of put along with this video is a report that local guide Trevor Husted did. And in that, he spends more time talking about the weather and this, like, we did have some interesting fog mist kind of events in the brief gap between storms that, as far as I can tell, most likely did lead to the formation of that intermittent buried surface hoar in this area. So maybe transitioning a teeny bit. So with the benefit of hindsight for yourself, for yourself, looking back on this, are there any things that, once you had appropriate distance and time and all that stuff, and you think back on this, that you sort of take away?
I think Marissa touches on it in the film, but we didn't do a beacon check that morning, and that was a huge mistake. It's so easy on those early mornings to forget. Like, we're professionals. We should have done a beacon check. There's no excuse for that. Thankfully, everyone was on it enough to turn their beacons on. But that, I couldn't have lived with myself if that was the reason that we couldn't find him, or if there was some sort of malfunction that added time to the rescue because of that reason. And that's just so simple, there's no excuse for that.
And that's the spring. This was fall. This was December 2019. I think it was spring of 2020. There were 2 fatal avalanche accidents with professionals who were out recreating in the backcountry with transceivers that were not on. And so this seems obvious. It is simple. Like, we should all know this, and it's something that has happened repeatedly. So yeah, it's a good one to.
Yeah, and not being worried that you're gonna be that guy on a low AVI day where you're like, hey guys, let's do a beacon check, and that was one of my main take homes of where we did screw up on the day.
I am that guy. I work for the Avalanche Center. I'm the nerd. I do it, but I definitely feel like I'm that guy when I'm like, hey guys, let's do this or whatever, when it's a casual group. And like, I just got to let go of that kind of whatever, that weird.
And you'd be surprised, of how many times you're like, oh yeah, because you're at the parking lot, it's warm, and avalanche danger is nil. But yeah, that and yeah, hindsight, it really brought home the fact of we do these refreshers every preseason, and to continue doing that, to keep those skills sharpened, you know. Just the, getting your brain in that mindset for reacting quickly. And there is no room for hesitation in those situations. Anyone that's been in an avalanche scenario, every second counts. And so continuing your avalanche education for your entire career in the backcountry, is going to be paramount. Some people that, kind of mentor me told me years ago that avalanche education is the one class that you never graduate from. And I heard that and kind of took that with me, and always remind myself that, there's always new rescue techniques being developed and refined. The Avalanche Handbook every year, they kind of have new protocols every year after various studies in terms of beacon searches and just the proper way to conduct a rescue. And staying up to date with those, can be a life and death difference.
So, you had this terrifying accident, it worked out. I believe you finished the sort of refresher course that you're all doing. You come out, and then well, first off, just to say, like, you all did report it right away. The Avalanche Center was made aware, which is, thank you. It's what we ask people to do. But beyond just that sort of basic expectation of communicating this important information to the Avalanche Center and the public, the decision was made to share the video and sort of take it to that next level. I'm just curious, how is that process? I mean, was there like concern personally or within your crew about sharing this pretty intimate experience? And then what was the response from the public?
Yeah, I think as backcountry users within our community, we owe it to each other to share our beta. And, especially when it comes down to avalanches and things like that, if I am out in the backcountry and I see natural avalanche activity or unstable results, I'll text you guys with a photo and whatnot, because, there's so many of us out there nowadays, and there's really no excuse for not having this big picture view of the range of what's going on, right? That's what builds our backcountry community. And so we can all go out there and do it safely with, the best resources that we have at our disposal. And it definitely took some time for the crew to put this video together. Being not being the victim in the avalanche, it wasn't up to me to say. It's always up to the individual, right, of what they're comfortable with, because it's a traumatic experience. You need time to process those types of events. And we were in a pretty cool situation where we did have that documentation of the avalanche, with it being on camera, and then photos of the area, and paint this picture of the day of what was going on in our decision-making process. And, there, like, maybe in the past it was a little taboo to talk about avalanches for fear of seeming reckless or seeming like you were being careless out there. But the reality is that, like, we're still going out into the backcountry. That's a volatile environment, and these things can happen. And so being able to share that with others, hopefully others can watch this video and take something home from it that they can implement into their day-to-day routine in the backcountry that will hopefully prevent an accident like this to occur. And the more people we have sharing avalanche activity out there, the safer we all are. And to point fingers when people do set off an avalanche and say, oh, you shouldn't have been there, you should have known better. You don't know until you're in that, unless you were there at that event. So there's always something that isn't made public like that. And so with this avalanche, we had all of those bases covered, you know, where we could paint that big picture of why we dropped in that day, and how things unfolded, you know, and people learn, we learn from our mistakes, right? And so being able to share that with our community is really important. And so I highly encourage, you know, people, when you're out in the backcountry and, you know, you see a natural avalanche or you set off an avalanche, you know, take a picture, take a video, send it to the Sierra Avi Center, you know, tag them on Instagram. I'm personally looking at the Sierra Avalanche Center Instagram every day in the winter, and I'm looking at the stories for people that tag the Avi Center, because I want to know what's going on, you know, from from the Buttes down to South Lake. You know, it's nice to know of what's going on out there.
Um, uh, yeah, thank you. I'm glad that the crew, you know, came to that decision. And I mean, I completely agree. Like the communal benefit of sharing such a good, you know, an interesting educational case study. You know, I'm glad that you chose to share it. Just, you know, that's obviously the ethic that we are trying to encourage with the Avalanche Center. But one of the concerns that I often have is that, you know, when we share things on the internet, people act like people on the internet and are sometimes cruel and lame. And um, that did that happen much to you, or I mean, was that a something that
You know,
sort of came down on you guys afterwards?
not really. Everyone within the community was pretty supportive of our decision to release this video. And you know, it's hard to be vulnerable, to put yourself out there, and you are at risk from having negative comments and, you know, people, you know, making you seem like you shouldn't have been out there. um but you know what I'll say to those people writing those comments is, you know, don't be an armchair quarterback. You weren't there, and you don't know all the you know, everything that got those people to that place. And then, you know, to the people that do, you know, to kind of take a leap and decide to share their experiences, I commend you for that. And you know, that's what helps you guys at the Avi Center make you know, more in-depth avalanche forecasts. You know, we need that information on the ground. You guys can only go to certain areas, you know, throughout the day, throughout the week, whatever. And you know, as backcountry users, we're dispersed out across the whole range. And you know, as we know, there's lots of intricate nooks and crannies of it all. And you know, had we not been in that area, um you know, and had this whole thing not occurred, that buried surface horror could have still been there in certain areas, and that uncertainty would have become even more uncertain, and people would have let their guard down even more, you know. So you know, really just embracing the tools that we have, and you know, being there to support each other when they do decide to be vulnerable and share an experience like that.
Yeah, I mean, again, like sincere thanks to, you know, your crew for arriving at the decision, and yourself for participating in that video and talking with us here tonight. Like I've asked multiple people to share experiences like this, and you know, I have sincere respect for you and all the folks similar positions who share that with the community, because it does sort of open you up to some criticism, and there's certain feelings of vulnerability. Sort of in closing, like leaving that case study for a second, looking ahead at this season, any general goals, hopes, things you're looking forward to for the upcoming winter?
Hopes that we have a great winter.
Here, here.
um, you know, this nice spackling of snow has been fun to get out on snow and stretch the legs. And you know, just pray that we can have somewhat of an average winter and enjoy the mountains that we all love.
I'm very much looking forward to that as well. This was a long, smoky summer, and I'm looking
There
forward to
was.
some cold winter therapy for sure.
I think everyone's ready. And you know, as there's more of us out there in the backcountry, you know, there's, you know, you can't say it enough of how important it is to get this education and, you know, practice your skills. And you know, just kind of understanding that we're all in this together for the same common goal. And you know, to respect everyone's space out there, and just to support each other, and you know, hopefully allow us all to find fresh POW somewhere.
Looking forward to that myself. Nick, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.